Good day, everybody. Welcome back to session number 7 today of the Hobbit Immersion Camp, as we will come to the end of Smaug and what seems like the end of Bilbo's adventure, based upon what we learned at the beginning of the story. But of course, as we can see, we still have 3 more days to go, so obviously that's not quite the case. But I will, as always, hand things over to Ms. Binkley.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm so glad you're here today. Once again, don't worry about asking questions if you haven't been able to keep up with the reading and don't have questions from that. You can always ask questions based on what we're talking about today. So don't be bashful about asking questions. So today we're going to start by actually talking about a question that came up yesterday. Someone asked, how did Smaug get his name? So I had taken a class from Professor Tolkien about The Hobbit and the history of how The Hobbit was written. So I had something kind of tucked in the back of my brain. And so I actually researched my notes and I found this particular bit of information I want to share with you. Down here at the bottom, where I have it cited, is Humphrey Carpenter is an author who collected up the papers, actually the letters of J.R.R. Tolkien, and compiled them into a volume that you can actually read letters that Tolkien wrote to people. And all the way back in 1938, Tolkien wrote a letter to The Observer. The Observer is a newspaper in England, and they had made some comments about the book because The Hobbit had just been released and was very popular. And so he wrote a letter, kind of like a letter to the editor, saying some information. And I pulled out the sentence that actually applies to how he came up with this name. Now, you have to remember, he was what they call a philologist. He's a person who studied the origins of words. Where did this word come from? How did it change over time? What did it used to mean? What did it mean now? That was what he actually did. He taught classes as well, but he did a lot of research on words. So this is what he said in the letter he wrote to The Observer. The dragon bears as name the past tense of the primitive Germanic verb smugan, which means to squeeze through a hole. So that's where he kind of got that word, and he liked the way it sounded, and he liked the fact that as a worm would be squeezing through a hole, and actually dragons are a type of worm in Tolkien's stories, so there we go. Oh, Professor, I did not take the class from Professor Tolkien. I took the class from Professor Olson. So sorry about that. Yeah, I'd be pretty old. I'm old already, but I'd be even older if I'd taken a class from Professor Tolkien. But boy, would that ever have been fun. I heard that he did all sorts of really cool things in his classes. So that would have been quite a treat to have been able to be one of his students. So thank you for catching me on that. But anyway, so I'm hoping that that answers our question. He studied words, and he remembered or found this word that meant smugan, squeeze through a hole. So Smaug comes from that. It's kind of a fun question. It was fun to go back and research through my notes and find that kind of information again. So we're going to now talk about this chapter 13, Not at Home. So where we left off, they were trapped inside the tunnel because Smaug came and finally figured out where the opening was, where they were, and he destroyed the side of the mountain. And we looked at some really cool pictures of Smaug attacking the mountain. He was highly irritated, Smaug was, because number one, somebody had dared to come steal from him, and number two, that little burglar, he did not like him at all. And he assumed that everybody came from, these were people from Lake Town because of the comment that Bilbo made that he was a barrel rider, and which indeed he was, because he rode the barrel into Lake Town. But Smaug is angry. So that's about all we know about him right now. Oh, Amy has a very nice question. Amy, the Tolkien's for Tolkien's initials, he went by in his published work J.R.R. Tolkien, and he had this really cool monogram that he made that I'm sure that you've probably seen. It's like a J with the R's coming off the side. His name was John Rule. I've forgotten one of his names now. The R stands for Rule. John Rule Tolkien. I'll have to look that up unless somebody else remembers what it is and can let me know. Yeah, that was a very good question, though. And Will F wants to know how old I am. Well, I'll tell you what I tell everyone. I'm old enough to know better. And if your parents have ever said whenever you were little and you did something really crazy and they said you're old enough to know better than to do that, I just always tell people. J.R.R. John Ronald Rule. I couldn't remember the Ronald. And I think his friends called him Trotters or something like that. He had a nickname anyway among all of his friends, like you might have a nickname. I actually don't have, I don't have a nickname myself, so because my name's pretty weird anyway. Tollers, that's what his friends called him, was Tollers for short. And his friends and family simply called him Ronald. So let's now talk about not at home. Well, who do you suppose is not at home? Well, there we go. The company is trapped in the tunnel. Now, we had a question yesterday about how did Thrain and Thor get out? They're the ones who drew the map, remember? And how did they get out? Did they use magic? Did they have a key or something like that? Well, they're trapped inside now with the door shut. And what happened to them is not magic. It's simply destruction. Whenever Smaug hit the mountain, so much rock fell down into the tunnel that there was no magic, there was no key that would ever open the door again. So we never have the chance to go back and actually explore. Could the door be open from the inside? Was there a magic word? Was there a key that they just simply didn't have yet? So unfortunately, we don't know if that door how the door was open from the inside. And they can't get out. They don't have a key. The dwarves are like really upset. They do not want to go down that tunnel. They don't want to go down there and face Smaug. They're not warriors. They don't want to go down there and deal with him. So Bilbo says, you know what? I've been down here twice. And his dad, Bungo Baggins, always used to say, third times pays for all. So he said, I will go down again and see what's going on. So he goes down the tunnel first, and the dwarves follow along behind him. So it's dark. Now remember the last time he was down there, it was kind of glowing from the dragon, but now it is pitch black. He can't see anything. As a matter of fact, he actually walks off the end of the tunnel and plunk falls down into the room. And so he starts yelling at the dwarves, you know, hey, 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 I can't see anything. I'm down here. I need some light. So they go back up the tunnel, and the dwarves do. They go back up the tunnel because in their supplies they have torches. So they light up some torches. They give a torch to Bilbo and send him off to go looking for Smaug, which is really kind of ridiculous when you think about that. So he's down there now with the torch, and you can see this nice little picture here of a little hobbit, and he's holding a torch. And he's walking up a big pile like a mountain or a hill of treasure, and he sees something glittering. And it just draws him right towards it, almost like he's under the spell of this stone that's glowing off of the light from his torch. And I'll read to you here. It was the Arkenstone, the heart of the mountain. So Bilbo guessed from Thorin's description, but indeed there could not be two such gems, even in so marvelous a hoard, even in all the world. Ever as he climbed, the same white gleam had shone before him and had drawn his feet towards it. So it's almost like he's being pulled in by by the glow of this stone. So he picks it up, and I have a question here about the size. Now we remember that a hobbit, how big a hobbit is, and the stone was so big he could not close his hand around it. And Giancola, this artist here, he has drawn this beautiful, beautiful drawing of the Arkenstone, and the light from the torch just shatters and splitters all around, and Bilbo's practically mesmerized by this. And Bilbo lifts it up, he shuts his eyes, and he puts it in his deepest pocket, and he says to himself, now I am a burglar indeed, because he basically has just taken the Arkenstone. And so he starts rationalizing and saying things like, oh, well, they told me I could choose whatever I wanted and stuff like this, but he knows that Thorin really wants this stone. So let's take a look at this here. So Will F. wanted to know, where did Dane live on the map? Dane lived in the Iron Hills, which are further to the east. So if you look on the map, any map of Middle-earth, you'll see that he's quite a ways over to the east. And how big was the Arkenstone? Jubilee wanted to know. Well, it was too big for Bilbo to hold in his hand, so Bilbo would have had a small hand. So I imagine that I probably could have fit it in my hand just by the descriptions that they're giving. And Amy wanted to know why the heart of the mountain is so special, other than it being the heart of the mountain. I think that it was just really a prized jewel. The dwarves had actually cut this jewel. It didn't appear like this when they mined it out. It had been cut in all these beautiful facets, and was just very special to their family. CJ is wondering is if the dragon is so big, how did he fit through the dwarf-made passages? Well, we're going to talk about that in just a little bit, so go ahead and hang on to that question, CJ. He only actually went through the front door, and whenever we look at some of the pictures of the front door, you're going to see that it's actually a pretty big front door. Jubilee is wondering, did it have any magic, as dwarves use some sort of magic in their possessions? It's never mentioned that the Arkenstone actually contained any magic, or that magic was used to create it. It was just a work of craftsmanship. Dwarves were known for being able to craft things that were incredibly beautiful. Sebastian's wondering if it was like an opal. It's just described as a stone that reflects light back. And I don't know if opals, when you shine light on them, if they reflect light back. Most opals usually aren't cut like a diamond is cut. So in my mind movie, Sebastian, I've always imagined it as a really big diamond, or some other kind of jewel like that, a really hard diamond, whereas an opal is a really soft one, and they're not usually carved. Will F. has a really interesting question about Bilbo. Did he have different sized pockets? Well, apparently he had one that was really deep. His clothing's not super described, although remember we did talk about his sword, being that he wore his sword inside his pants and actually forgot about it, so his pants were kind of baggy. And so I don't know if it was a coat pocket that he put it in or if it was a pants pocket. Alan has a really good question. If Bilbo knew that Thorin wanted the Arkenstone, why did he take it? Well, he used what we call a rationalization. He convinced himself that it was okay for him to have the Arkenstone because they had actually told him he could have any, because they depended on him so much that he could have anything he wanted as his share of the treasure. And so Bilbo says to himself, as he's taking the Arkenstone, this is my share of the treasure. Although he knows that it really wasn't on the table, as you might say, because it was something that Thorin valued so highly. Make sure I talk about everything there that I wanted to. Okay. So anyway, they light the torches because they figure out now that there's no dragon there, and because the Bilbo's yelling back and they're yelling back and forth and no dragon appears. So they light torches and go off and explore the area. And in there they find mail that's different types. The mail comes in different types. Basically, mail is armor. And they find weapons on the walls, and they take those down and they look at them. And Thorin puts on a coat, and it says, "Royal indeed did Thorin look, clad in a coat of gold-plated rings with a silver-hafted axe and a belt crusted with scarlet stones." So these dwarves were quite rich, remember? They were very, very wealthy. And they could get everything they needed just by crafting all of these beautiful things. So here we have some pictures here. I'm not so sure that this is the Mithril shirt that we have Bilbo in, but this is from the movie from the 1970s and on The Hobbit, and it shows him dressed in this, and I thought that was really kind of interesting, because if that's that artist idea of the Mithril shirt that we're going to be talking about here in a minute, it doesn't match my mind movie, but we do have Thorin here dressed up in for battle. And then over here, we have them wandering up and down the stairs and looking at treasure. And the treasure here is kind of piled up, but also it's in chests and things. Let's take a look at some more questions here. Leah's wondering, why was Arkenstone different? What color was it? Why was it unique amongst all the other gems? And is there a heart to every mountain? Could any gem become an Arkenstone, or was it genuinely unique? And did it have a stone on it? Well, the Arkenstone, first of all, was a stone within itself. It's a beautifully crafted gem. The color is not really mentioned because it talks about it splitting light into various colors like a prism. If you've ever seen a prism with light going through it, it makes kind of like a rainbow. And basically, it was unique because they decided it was unique, that the dwarves themselves had put the value on this stone, and they cherished it, the stone, and that's what actually gave it its value. I don't know if there's a heart to every mountain. It's a really good thought that every mountain would have a heart and have some sort of precious gem that it's just up to people to find. But it's not really mentioned that it had any kind of that every mountain would have a heart to it. Caden is wondering about, did the dragon have magic? The dragon certainly, in my opinion, had magic, because he was a very sly talker. Remember, he almost talked Bilbo into distrusting the dwarves. So that, to me, was his magic. Let's take a look at our next slide. We can get it to advance. Yeah. Okay. This, to me, is one of the most interesting things in the book. And they're wandering around, looking at all the treasure, and Thorin finds this. It's a coat of armor. It's a chain mail kind of coat of armor. And that is usually what knights would put on underneath plate armor, so that in case the plate armor was punctured or dented, it would still protect them. And chainmail is made usually just like that. And they take rings and put them together. As a matter of fact, we had a teacher at the school where I was teaching this. It actually had a class in making chainmail. So a lot of my students would take my Hobbit class and then go take his chainmail class. But anyway, that's just an aside. Chainmail is just put together, and it helps protect the body from piercing weapons. So anyway, he pulls this chainmail jacket out or this coat, and it's very small. So he calls, Thorin does, "Mr. Baggins," he cried, "here is the first payment of your reward. Cast off your old coat and put on this." With that, he put on Bilbo a small coat of mail, wrought for some elf prince long ago. It was of silver steel, which the elves call mithril, and with it went a belt of pearls and crystals. A light helm of figured leather, strengthened beneath with hoops of steel and studded upon the brim with white gems, was set upon the hobbit's head. I feel magnificent, he thought, but I expect I look rather absurd. How they would laugh on the hill at home. Still, I wish there was a looking glass handy. So he has this magnificent, bejeweled armor on him. I doubt that a small elf prince, because remember Bilbo's pretty small, that a small elf prince would be going into battle. So this was probably more of a ceremonial type of outfit, but still Bilbo felt very, very, very handsome in this, but he thought he probably just looked ridiculous. CJ has a question. Do I know how old the Lonely Mountain is? Well, if we take a look at all of Tolkien's writings as a unit, and whenever Middle-earth was created by the gods, that's probably how old it was. But it's not really talked about in The Hobbit, about it being the age of the mountain ranges or anything. That's not mentioned. I do know that the dwarfs had lived there for a very long time. And one of the things that you can tell is as they're wandering through this underground palace, because that's what it is. It's a palace. It's beautifully carved, even though the dragon has been living there. So we're trying to get the slideshow to cooperate. There we go. Now we had the question earlier about the door. Here is the door, and they call it the front door, and you can see the river running. Starts here and it comes out, okay? And this is the entrance that the dragon used. There is the birth of the river running. Remember, they're still down inside of the palace here, and they see where the stream comes burbling out. I think it's described as boiling out, so it'd be all coming out really quickly. There is the birth of the running river, said Thorin. From here, it hastens to the gate. Let us follow it. So they're heading towards the front gate. Out of a dark opening in a wall of rock, there issued a boiling water, and it flowed swirling in a narrow channel carved and made straight and deep by the cunning of ancient hands. So this is a very ancient place. And then they follow the river out, and they're at the front entrance. A misty sun sent its pale light between the arms of the mountain, and beams of gold from the sun. Beams of gold fell on the pavement at the threshold. Ooh, some questions about the Mithril. Jubilee wants to know if the chainmail was magic. You know, there may have been some sort of magic that went into the creation of it, of the chainmail, because the crafters, the dwarves who crafted the chainmail for the Elven Prince, they kind of sometimes put magic into things. I think, just like the doors, those doors were pretty magic. And there's a question from Joshua about how is Mithril made? Is it mentioned in the Lord of the Rings? Mithril is just a mineral, a very rare mineral, but it is very, very, very hard, but yet it is also what they call malleable, meaning that if you've ever seen a gold nugget and hammered on it, well, this is my Alaskan showing again. If you have a gold nugget and you hammer on it, or even if you rub it really hard, it will start to flatten out. That's called the malleability of the mineral. And you can work it out, and that's how they make things like gold rings and so on. So what they would do is take that chunk of, this is what I'm thinking, the mithril. They would take the chunk of mithril, and then they would hammer it out and beat it out until they made the chain mail. But the thing about mithril, not only could it be bent and be worked, but it was extremely strong. It couldn't be pierced. Lee has some more questions about mithril. What exactly is it? Well, it's a type of mineral. What color is it? Well, they called it steel, so I'm thinking of it as being kind of a grayish color because steel is that color. And how strong is it? Is it really just steel with a different name, or is it unique? It is very unique. Whenever you read in the Lord of the Rings, you'll find that it's very, very scarce and hard to come by. And were there other unique metals? I can't remember them mentioning any other metals that are super unique, although gold and silver both get mentioned a lot in the books. Is there any mention of mithril or other different metals in the other books? Well, they do talk about, like I said, gold and silver, and they talk about iron, and they talk about, I can't remember any mention of tin. I know there's a mention of copper, and of course the mithril. Just kind of running down through my geology of Middle Earth list. So yes, Lee, there would be, the common minerals that we would find, but mithril was the one that Tolkien created, this kind of magical, almost super strong, yet easy to work metal. We're going to take a little bit of a look here. So anyway, the dwarves come out, there's no sign to come out. But this we're going to take a look at on our next slide. Remember I told you to pay attention to Tolkien's poetry. He was a word person. That was his job, to study words. But he really liked to play with words as well. And that's one of the reasons why his poetry and all of his writing is so much fun to take a look at, because you get to see how he played with words. I picked this particular section out of the book because it's also a play on words, but there's a lot of wordplay here, but it's not poetry. And so here they are at the door and they're leaving out. And so page 217 in my book, a whirl of bats frightened from slumber by their smoking torches flurried over them as they sprang forward, their feet slithered on stones rubbed smooth and slimed by the passing of the dragon. Look at all these ones that start with S. I put an underline under each one of these, underscored all of these S words. So we're talking about the dragon, and the dragon is a worm just kind of slithering around. You kind of get the picture of it being a large, really large and deadly worm, but he's kind of slithering around in the caves, probably walking around, dragging his belly and all this because, hey, he's probably lazy. So anyway, you kind of get the feel with all of these S words in there that he's kind of, like slithering here. Slithered on stones, rubbed smooth and slimed. Whoa, pretty powerful words, just the sound of them. So as you are reading through Tolkien's works, make sure that you look for these kind of things. This is called alliteration, where the words start with a lot of things, and it's something you find in a lot of writing. But this one here, I thought we're talking about the dragon, and he was a slithery dragon. I just love that word, the slithering thing here. So I just thought I'd point this part out to you guys so that's something else you can look for. Jubilee has a question about mithril. Was it a heavy metal or was it light? It is described as being extremely lightweight. I always thought of it as aluminum, and whenever I was a young teenager, Pop-Tops got invented, and we were little kids, and we would collect the Pop-Tops, and my sister and I actually used the aluminum rings on the Pop-Tops, and we hooked them all together, and we made a really small mithril coat. Neither one of us, of course, could wear it because we didn't have that many Pop-Tops. But anyway, so I always imagined it in my mind movie that it would be as light as aluminum. And Will F is asking about the size of the river that flows out the front door. Let's see if I can get this thing to go back. Nope. Here we go. Okay, the river, as you can see there at its source, the source is on the inside of the cave, and so it's very small there. But this same river is the one that flows down from its origins here inside the Lonely Mountain, and then it comes down and it goes around, it turns into a river and goes around Dale and then down into eventually into Long Lake and then off from there. I think I've got all of these here. Samuel asked about what was the river flowing down from the Dragon's Cave. Well, Samuel, if you're referring to this as being the Dragon's Cave, it's called the river, the running river, they called it. I always thought it was called the river running, but I may be backwards on that. We'd have to just look at the map. So let's go ahead and take a look here now, what happens after they come out. So they exit, slither over the slimy, slithering stones. They actually come out. And then they decide that they're going to go to the old lookout because there they'll have a good view. And this artist here has kind of shown us, well, it was a ruin, but there were still some walls of stone up, and that's where they decided to be instead of being underground. In case the dragon comes back, they could be out here because they could have a really wide view and keep their eye on things. So it takes them a full day of marching to get there. So it's quite a ways away from the front door. And they arrive at the lookout. There's still no sign of Smaug. Now they were inside the tunnel for 2 nights and 1 day. So it's kind of like almost approaching the 3rd day. So when the sun comes up the next day, it will be 2 days since the dragon came and destroyed the outside of where the secret door is. Will F is wondering as if it would be wet inside of the cave. Well, it's not really a cave. You have to remember it's an underground palace. And they had carved where the river came out. If you remember, they described it as boiling out. It would be like a spring, and they had carved a long channel for the river to travel through. So I don't imagine that it would have been like a wet and drippy cave. And Will is also wondering about pools being inside of the cave. They're not really mentioned in anything that I can remember, but usually mountains have sources, and there's no reason why they couldn't have channeled some of that away to pools, you know, like for drinking water and that kind of thing, because it's, you know, a mountain spring coming out underground. So let's take a look at our journal entries. Well, here is your chance to use your imagination and sketch the Arkenstone. Pay attention to the description that Bilbo has whenever he finds it, and that will help you decide how big to make it and so on. And if you want, you can put it in Bilbo's hand. You can put it on the ground. You can decide, you can just have it sitting there by itself. And what did Bilbo do with the Arkenstone in this chapter? And then sketch the company traveling through the underground palace. Because remember, this isn't exactly a cave. Smaug moved in, but it was the palace, the home of the dwarves. And then you get to answer the question, where was Smaug? Here they've been, it's been a couple of days, and they're outside looking around, and they see no sign of him. They don't know where he was. Let's take a look at our sources. There we go. What did Bilbo do with the Arkenstone? Well, we've already talked about this. Suddenly, Bilbo's arm went towards it, drawn by its enchantment. His small hand would not close about it, for it was a large and heavy gem, but he lifted it, shut his eyes, and put it in his deepest pocket. So he is drawn to it by its enchantment. So someone asked about whether or not it was magical. Kind of sounds like it might have been. And where was Smaug? The company did not know where Smaug had gone. After destroying the secret door, Smaug attacked Lake Town, but the dwarves and Bilbo did not know this until later. So where was Smaug? For the purposes of the company, they don't know. Move on to our next chapter called Fire and Water. We're going to learn a little bit more about Smaug now. So we're going to also, I talked about literary devices earlier. We're going to talk about another literary device. It's called a flashback. So we're going to actually go back in time now and pick up the story in the past and then move forward again. And eventually both of our stories will twine together again. But we're going to go back in time now with our flashback. The people of Lake Town see lights on the lonely mountain. Well, they don't realize it's the dragon. They assume that the dwarves are forging gold. And there's a grim-voiced man walking around. That's how he's described, as a grim-voiced man. And he keeps telling everybody, you know, the dragon is coming. That's what the light is, people. And they're all going, no, no, the rivers are going to be running with gold. We're all going to be rich. And finally, he convinces them, as they can tell that the light's getting larger and larger, and they have realized it's the dragon coming. So what they do is they break the bridge. Now remember, Lake Town is built out on the lake, and they break the bridge as part of their defenses, and they get buckets of water, and they everybody gets their bows and arrows out because they are going to have to shoot this dragon. So Smog did not like, Smog is coming towards the city, and it says that he was really unhappy that bridge had been destroyed. I don't know if he was planning on walking down it or whatever, but Tolkien says that Smaug does not like the fact that the town is out over the water. He says actually that the water is more powerful than the dragon, and that if the dragon was to go into the water, it would put out his fire. Smaug does not want that. Smaug is so angry that these people have cut the bridge, that those dwarves had robbed him, that they had dared to come in there, that the barrel rider had obviously come from this town, and so on, that he is enraged and flies out over the lake and starts attacking the city. So let's take a look here at this quote while we take a look at these actually kind of terrifying pictures. Here you can see him just flying by. Look at that mouth. Mean, mean dragon. Fire leapt from the dragon's jaws. He circled for a while high in the air above them, lighting all the lake. The trees by the shores shone like copper and like blood, with leaping shadows of dense black at their feet. Then down he swooped, straight through the arrow storm, reckless in his rage, taking no heed to turn his scaly sides towards his foes, seeking only to set their town ablaze. So the dragon is actually kind of lost all of his senses. He's not being sensible, cold, calculating dragon. He is enraged. And the archers in the town are shooting at him, but the arrows are just bouncing off him. You know, nothing can take this dragon down. Okay. Jubilee's wondering about the fire that was on Smaug didn't harm him. Well, he's what they call a fire drake, and he somehow or another produces fire from within him and can actually breathe flames out, so the fire would not be hurting him. I don't imagine, Jubilee, that even if the flames leaped up and, you know, hit his wings, I don't think it would set him on fire. I don't have any idea what would prevent it from burning him, but apparently he's immune to his own fire. So as you look at the pictures here, you can see the people, the town, of course, on fire, and people are trying to escape in boats. What they did was they gathered up the women, children, and the old and the injured and put them in boats, and were trying to get them away from the town because now it's all on fire. And pretty tense time. So here we have Bard. I have 3 different visions here of Bard by 3 different artists. So you can kind of see that the mind movie that different people create is really quite different. Because if you look at this guy, he looks like an action hero. This one here just looks like a normal person with a bow and arrow. And this one here, you can see he's wearing tights. He kind of looks like, and slippers, not big boots or anything. He's just a man with a bow. And then, of course, we have this. Take a look here. We'll talk about that in a minute. This one shows the dragon coming, and this one also shows the dragon coming. So anyway, Bard is the captain of the archers, and their captain was Bard, grim-voiced and grim-faced. He's the guy who said, that's the dragon coming, and people didn't believe him. No, 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 the dwarves are creating gold. We're all going to be rich. Bard was a descendant of the long line of Girion, the Lord of Dale, whose wife and child had escaped down the running river from the ruin long ago. So they were that little, he's from his family actually, not him. His family is actually from that little town, Dale, which was right outside Erebor, the city in the Lonely Mountain. And they were friends with the dwarves. And whenever the dragon attacked, the dragon didn't just attack the dwarves, he also attacked and destroyed the town of Dale. And so Bard's ancestors managed to escape down to the Esgaroth, the lake town. And so here we have the thrush. Now remember, the thrush was hanging out whenever Bilbo came, when Bilbo came running out, and the dragon had kind of attacked him and singed his fur. Bilbo didn't have fur, he had hair. Singed his hair, and he came running out, and he was telling the story about the dragon having that patch on the left side without any armor. And the thrush was there listening to him. So the thrush flies up to Bard, and he says, "Wait, wait," the thrush said to him. "The moon is rising. Look for the hollow of the left breast as he flies and turns above you." So this bird comes and lands, basically either he's flying right there, right beside him, lands on his shoulder and starts talking to him, and Bard's going like, "Wow, I can understand this bird." Well, that's because he's descended from the Dale people, and the Dale people could understand the language of thrushes. So he waits, and he pulls out his last arrow, Bard does, and he says, "Black arrow, I have saved you to the last. You have never failed me. I had you from my father, and he from of old." So he goes ahead and notches that in his bow, the black arrow, his last arrow, and he lets loose, and Smaug is hit, and it's a mortal blow. With a shriek that deafened men, fell trees, and split stone, Smaug shot spouting into the air, turned over, and crashed down on high in ruin. Full on the town he fell. His last throws splintered it to sparks and gleeds. The lake roared in. A vast steam leaped up, white in the sudden dark under the moon. There was a hiss, a gushing whirl, then silence. And that was the end of Smaug and Esgaroth, but not of Bard. So I did want to point out this word here, gleeds. That is a glowing coal. So he has taken the dragon out, Bard has. But it's been teamwork. You gotta not, and they're not even, don't even know they're on the same team. It was Bilbo who discovered it. It was the thrush who heard. The thrush carries the message to Bard, and Bard happens to have one arrow left, and the dragon is no more. So we have some questions here. CJ wants to know if Smaug had had any encounters with Lake Town in the past. You know, I always wondered about that, CJ, why if Smaug had taken out Dale, which was the town right outside of the Lonely Mountain, and then gone into the Lonely Mountain, why he hadn't gone further south. But I think that what he was really after more than anything else was the treasure that was inside the Lonely Mountain, because dwarves were immeasurably rich. Dale was really rich, and apparently Smaug took all of the treasure from Dale and deposited all of that inside the Lonely Mountain as well, and made this big mound of treasure to lie upon. So I don't know that, you know, I work it out in my head. I'm thinking like, well, maybe Lake Town just wasn't rich enough, or maybe he was satisfied with just having all of the riches that he had. So that's my best answer on that one. And no, I don't think he had any encounters in the past. Jubilee is wondering if the black arrow is made out of metal. Most arrows would not be made out of metal because they have to be able to travel a great distance. And if you're shooting with a bow or doing archery, which is what they're doing to defend the city from the dragon, they're just using regular bows and arrows. And the arrows, remember, are bouncing off because the dragon is armored, except for that one spot. And the black arrow probably was black, but it may have had a specially designed type of arrowhead on it that was black. It is mentioned that Bard has always retrieved that arrow when he's gone out and used it before. And so it's like a family heirloom. And I don't think he got it back from the dragon at all. And we'll talk about that in just a moment in my notes here. And how high in the air was Smaug before he was shot down by Bard? Jubilee has that question as well. Jubilee, it's not really spelled out in how many feet above the city the dragon was, but the dragon was close, coming in close while he was attacking. At one time in the story, it mentions that he gets close enough to the town, the dragon does, that he takes his tail and knocks over the tallest building in the town. And Sid's wondering, how did he get the treasure from Dale? Well, the dragon that Tolkien drew is a four-legged dragon with wings on the back. So he could have used his front paws and just carried it away. It doesn't really say any place, Sid, in the book about how he got the treasure from Dale. It just says that the treasure from Dale was also under the mountain. So there's not a lot of specifics on that. So anyway, the dragon is dead. The town is dead. This drawing here by Mr. Lee is really interesting because you can see the people escaping in boats. A lot of people were killed in this battle. And remember what time of the year it is. It is almost winter. As a matter of fact, I think it is the start of winter. It's cold. So whenever you're in the water and you have to be pulled out of the water and you're wet, hypothermia can set in. So it says in the story that several people died even after, you know, they made it back to land. So they all go to the western shore of a long lake. And they're hanging out there. And Bard is going around and helping organize and, you know, set people up and find food for people. And they keep saying, you know, that he's the dragon slayer. They want to make him king. And he's going like, I'm not the king. You know, we have a master of the town, kind of like he is elected by the town. We don't have a king here. And while there's a master and while I'm here, I'm going to do what the master needs me to do. And that's to get you guys organized so that we can survive. You know, like winter's just right around the corner and we don't have any houses. We don't have any food. However, it does say that their crops and their beasts that lived on the land around Lake Town were still available for them to use. So he goes ahead and organizes everybody, but he also sends fast messengers to the Elven Kingdom, because remember, they have trade going on with them. So they are running up the road, the messengers are, and they meet the Elven King and lots and lots and lots of elves who are coming towards them. Now, how did they know to come? Because they had started before all of this big dragon thing went on with Lake Town? Well, it has to do with birds. Birds apparently talk a lot. So there were lots of birds who were coming to talk to the Elven King and tell him what had happened. So it was about 3 or 4 days before the Elven King actually got to help the people of Lake Town. But the birds had already flown there and told him the dragon's dead. And the king thought to himself, the Elven King's thinking like, well, there's a lot of treasure there because everybody's assuming the company's dead because dragons. So they are coming there and everybody's thinking like, hey, there's treasure to be had. So the Elven King's on his way there to get treasure. Well, birds, not all the birds are nice birds. And so there are birds that talk to them. The goblins heard about it. And the word traveled all the way to Beorn. Beorn heard that the dragon was dead. So the word is out. It seemed like it's gone all over Middle Earth. I don't know if it passed over the Misty Mountains and if Elrond knew about it, but it seems like everybody on the other side of the Misty Mountains knew that the dragon was dead, except the dwarves in the company. They didn't have a clue. They did not know. So the elves decide we're going to help the people. So they turn aside. They were on their way to the Lonely Mountain to get treasure. And they turn aside and they help the people from Lake Town. And they are working on building houses for people to live in so they have shelter from the winter. And they are helping them get food and so on and so forth. And then they have to decide, what are we going to do now? We have some questions here. So we answered that one, Sid's question about Smaug getting the treasure from Dale. It's not really spelled out, but we'll see. Lee has a question about how big was the dragon? Well, he was big enough to fall down, when he falls down, to crunch the entire town. It doesn't really say how big he is in terms of like so many feet or so many meters long or how many tons he weighed. It's never really spelled out. So you can really use your imagination to make your own mind movie of how big the dragon is. Is that Lale? L-A-L-E? Okay, has a question about what did they do with Smaug's treasure? Well, we're going to find out about that in the rest of this week because the treasure is a really big deal. I mean, like, there's mountains of treasure. And everyone assumes that there's nobody there in the Lonely Mountain. So they're going to go get it. That's what they're going to do. And did Gandalf know about Smaug being dead? Jubilee, you know what? He did actually know, when we find out about that later in the book, that he had actually heard as well. But at this particular time, we don't know. We don't know what Gandalf's even up to or where he is. One of the things we have to remember about the dragon is that he was encrusted with gold and jewels, right? Whenever he goes down into the lake, that's a big pile of treasure as well. But the people of Lake Town decided to rebuild their lake in an entirely different area because nobody wanted to be where the dragon body was. And it says in the book that nobody ever went there to gather up all the jewels and I'm assuming probably gold that was stuck on the dragon that he used for his armor. Nobody ever went there and got any of that. People are just like, oh no, we're not going there. Okay, I did tell you that the goblins also heard the news of Smaug's death. Okay. So anyway, everybody has treasure on their mind. Let's see if I can advance a slide for a change. Nope. Here we go. Okay, it's time to talk about your journals. Now, the Grim Man is Bard the Bowman. they're always talking about anyway, the town is always talking about how he is a grim person. He's always talking about fish being poisoned and bad things happening. So I guess he's kind of not a super happy, smiley kind of guy. So using the information that you read in the chapter and how the people who live in Lake Town describe Bard, I want you to go ahead and sketch a picture of him. Remember, he's also quite heroic because he does take out the dragon. And then answer the question, what did the thrush tell Bard? And then I want you to sketch Smaug destroying Lake Town. We saw some really cool pictures of Smaug flying around and setting things on fire, but do read the book description because it's quite exciting reading. It talks about how he sets buildings on fire, about how he uses his tail to knock buildings over. And he's doing this all, remember, in his rage. He's so angry at these people and the dwarves and that little guy who, that hobbit, he didn't know he was a hobbit, but that little guy who came and stole from him. And then answer the question, who came to help the men of Lake Town? So let's go ahead and take a look here. What did the thrush tell Bard? Well, the thrush had heard Bilbo tell the company of the weak place in Smaug's armor. So this is what he tells Bard. Wait, wait, it, meaning the thrush, said to him, meaning Bard, the moon is rising. Look for the hollow of the left breast as he flies and turns above you. So that is what the thrush told him. But also it mentions in the book, as I was reading it again today, the chapter, the thrush also told Bard other things as well, but it doesn't go into any detail. So I kind of wonder what else the thrush knew. So that's kind of an interesting thing to think about. And who came to help the men of Lake Town? Help came swiftly, for Bard at once had speedy messengers sent up the river to the forest to ask the aid of the king of the elves of the wood. And these messengers had found a host already on the move, although it was only then the third day after the fall of Smaug. So whenever, right directly after, get our timeline right here, right directly after Smaug destroys the secret door on the side of the mountain, he flies to Lake Town and is shot that night. The dwarves spend that night, the next day, and the next night in the tunnel before they finally decide to leave the tunnel and go out into the palace area. Okay, so it's starting the second night, the third night. Yeah, the third night they're up on the outlook looking over. Okay, and it is the third day whenever the elves arrive to help Lake Town. So things are starting to move really, really quickly in the story. And remember, Bilbo thought all he had to do was go to the mountain and burgle, steal things from the dragon. Seems like to me, the story's still going on. So if we don't have any other questions today, we'll meet again tomorrow and we will talk about what happens next, because remember, the treasure is a really big deal. Really big deal. There's a lot of treasure there. So with that, I'm looking forward to talking with you tomorrow and going over what the next exciting part of the story is.
That's right. As we've come to the theoretical end of the adventure, but there is much more to come. So very good. Thanks, everybody, and we will see you tomorrow for Wednesday's class. Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Bye-bye.